Thanks, Troy, for that introduction. I hope you can all hear me, but appreciate being asked to visit with the producers tonight. My role in tonight's discussion will be just to give a little background and basics on the nutritional requirements of a ewe and a doe, or a small ruminant female throughout her year-long production cycle, probably geared a little bit more towards how to balance the forage part of her diet throughout the year to make sure we're matching her nutritional demands for her stage of production. And then we'll turn it over to Troy and some of the other extension folks, and they'll visit more specifically on how to maybe go about purchasing, managing, storing, and the feed quality aspects of forages. So my talk tonight will be basically again about winter forage needs based on the NRC or nutritional requirements of small ruminants during the various stages of production. So for some of you, it may just kind of be a refresher back to a college nutrition course, but I think it's maybe important that we all understand that the nutritional demands of ewes and does do change throughout the year, and we as producers should always have a goal of matching those demands in the most economical way we can and the most efficient way we can. So as most of you know, regardless of what type of livestock industry you're in, maybe beef cattle, sheep production, swine production, regardless, most of the times the feed is the largest input cost of most livestock production operations. And so hopefully we can do a good job as producers to find the most economical, the most efficient way to feed and maintain our flocks, but at the same time meet their nutritional needs, and do that the most economical way we can. So what and how much we feed depends on a lot of factors. And certainly we'll talk about some of the factors here as we go through some of these slides. But the age of your flock, the age of the sheep that you're feeding. I'm going to be talking mainly about our ewe base, the mature flock, but I'm not going to mention much about growing lambs and even maintaining our rams. I'm going to basically focus more on the ewe flock because they're kind of the heart and soul of most operations. The weight of your sheep, that'll certainly dictate your feeding scheduling and how much you're feeding, what type of feeds you're going to use, because different size sheep have different requirements. The body condition score of your sheep are going to be, and goats are going to be very important. I like to tell my class, the sheep production class I teach here on campus, that observation of body condition score can tell you a tremendous amount of information. It allows you to make decisions on reproductive programming, allows you to make decisions on your nutritional program. So we'll show a slide here shortly. It's very, very important that all producers understand body condition scoring and how to utilize that in their systems. Stage and level production. And I see we have quite a few people from throughout the United States that are online right now. The climate, where you live. Do you live in a kind of a cold environment like we do here in Minnesota, where cold stress during the winter is going to make you have to feed additional nutrients? Or do you live in a more easy climate where you can utilize grazing for longer throughout the year? So climate's going to play a role as well. A great variety of feedstuffs are available. Again, with all the people online from coast to coast tonight, the variety of feedstuffs will be different depending on where you live. The variety of forages that you can use will be quite a bit different depending on where you live. And so we'll maybe touch a little bit on maybe more of the forages that we have available up here in the upper Midwest, but certainly different forages and pasture-based mixes can be utilized throughout the United States. There's no one perfect feeding program, and different producers can do things quite a bit differently and still be highly successful. So the choice of your feeding program will depend on obviously where you live and the forages you have available. It also can be determined, or it can depend on when you want to lamb or kid. Are you a winter lambing program, a spring lambing program, a summer lambing program, or even a fall program? That will certainly determine when and how you utilize forages in your program, and then the quality of forages that you might have available in your region. So here's a slide that just many of you might have seen. It's just found in most textbooks, and what this is a diagram of the dorsal process of a sheep. And so you can see the spine how prominent versus non-prominent. And the body condition scoring system for sheep and goats is based on a 1 through 5 scale, where 1 would be the most emaciated, skinniest animal. And as they go up to 2s, all the way up to 3s and 4s, and even to the highly obese sheep 5s, you can see that more fat and more fat deposition is laid along the spine and along the outside of the rib cage. And you'll see actually the muscle will get a little fuller as you leave the 1 score and work up into 2s and 3s. So you're going to see on a few of my slides later on numbers, body condition score, goals for that certain time of the year. Certainly, you can see here the differences again in the amount of fat cover that you're going to detect. And sometimes you actually have to put your hands on the sheep, particularly if they're in long fleece. You might have to put your hands on the sheep and actually feel for that spinous process and feel for the transverse process on the outer part of their rib. Because sometimes wool can kind of fool you. They may look a little fatter with a long fleece, but actually when you get your hands on them, sometimes you can be awfully surprised. So we're going to talk about all these scores from a 2 to a 3 to a 3 to a 4, and hopefully kind of make sure that our animals are at a proper body condition score during that stage of production throughout the year. So the basics of feeding your female within your herd or flock, okay? Ideally, sheep are ruminants, goats are ruminants, so we would love to be able to utilize the grazing season for much of their nutrition. And for most parts of the year, or most parts of the grazing season, if the pasture is in adequate nutrition and you monitor the supplements of salts and minerals, sheep can do awfully well and goats can do awfully well. And particularly if you have a higher quality pasture that maybe's been improved, they can certainly meet many of their nutrient requirements on good pasture alone. But as we get into the fall here in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, farmers are starting to think about how we're going to feed our animals throughout the winter season. So then you're going to have to feed some sort of stored forage. It could be a dry forage such as hay. Troy will talk about hay and silage and haylage later on. But hay is generally the most commonly used stored harvested forage here in Minnesota, and usually gets starting to get fed here September, October, when pastures are starting to kind of shorten up and run out. And with that, depending on the quality of your hay and how you balance the hay with grain, you might have to incorporate certain levels of grain in your diet. I'm not going to go into a lot of specific different grains tonight. You're going to see some slides later where they just talk about a general supplement grain mix. And those can be different, definitely made differently. But for the most part, you might have to supplement your pastures here as you get further into the fall and in the winter, definitely. So that's kind of the basics. It's no different in the cattle industry as well. They kind of have to follow the same programming as well. So what I'm going to do tonight is and I don't have awfully too many slides, but I'm going to go through the different cycles, life cycle or stage of production for feeding that female, okay? And I'm going to focus a little bit more towards the forage side of it. You'll see some charts that has the grain supplements included, but we're going to break it down into the breeding season, early to mid gestation, late gestation, and then as they get into lactation. And I'm going to kind of use the upper Midwest scheduling as we breed kind of in late summer, early fall, and they hit late gestation in the wintertime, and they tend to hit lactation February, March, April up here. So I'm going to use that system. Definitely it would be different. If you're a fall lambing operation, this could be it's going to be different. If you're in the southern part of the United States and you have extended grazing or maybe even year-round grazing with stockpiled forages, you're going to kind of tweak this scheduling just a little bit. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the upper Midwest, but certainly you can make this adaptable to any part of the United States. So I'm assuming probably most of the people that are online tonight have heard of the technique of flushing. And this is during the breeding portion or up to the breeding portion, right after the maintenance, kind of the maintenance part of their life is over and you get ready to start breeding. So currently a lot of flocks in Minnesota that are gearing up for fall breeding are in a mode of flushing. Here at the University of Minnesota in our sheep unit, which I help with, we started flushing our ewes. And so we bring them in from pasture. They were out on pasture for summer maintenance. And then we bring them in for flushing. And so this starts generally 2 weeks before breeding and continues almost 2 weeks into the actual breeding season. Some people will extend it a little bit longer, but we flush for about 2 weeks in and into breeding season. So what we do is we either can flush them on a high quality pasture, or in our case, we bring them into a dry allotted situation because we split them up with different rams and we feed them hay. And then we supplement that hay with about 3/4 to a pound of grain of hay. The hay we're using is a grass mix because there is some data out there that somewhat will tell you that maybe they don't need that extremely high quality alfalfa for flushing if you're using grain, if you are from a more economical standpoint. But you can also flush with high quality alfalfa by itself. It just kind of depends on the price point and cost per day. In our situation, it is more economical to use a mid-level grass hay supplemented with a grain mix. Flushing is certainly beneficial. It has been proven to improve lambing percentage by 10 to 20%. But I will tell you that flushing generally works best on your thinner females. And in our situation, the pasture that our ewes spend the summer on is a good pasture early on. And then by about August here, when it gets warm and kind of dries out, the pasture kind of starts running out a little bit. And our ewes generally come in from summer pasture somewhere in that 2 to 2.5 body condition score. And with that actually works as a benefit to us from a flushing standpoint. We're able to get those ewes in on a higher plane of nutrition, kind of an accelerated plane of nutrition with the grain and the hay. And we're able to get a high number, a high lambing percentage, many multiple births out of our females. And we're working with purebred Hampshire females and Hampshire cross females, which generally aren't very maternal as a breed generally, but we're able to get a high number, high lambing percentage. So it works well for us. It doesn't work well flushing when those ewes are already at a condition score of 3 or greater. You tend not to see the benefit. One thing to warn, if you do want to flush on pasture, which is good if you have a high quality pasture, it tends to be not as successful if you're dealing with fresh pasture with a high percentage of legumes. Generally over 50% is kind of what the guidance is. So you can affect the reproduction. It does have some effect. The high estrogen content of some of those legumes will have a negative effect on ovarian function and those kind of things. So legume mixed hays, though, do not have this effect. And so certainly you can use a legume mixed hay because it's a dry stored forage and have a good flushing experience. Then we move on to early to mid gestation. So in Minnesota, if you're breeding in September, early to mid gestation works all the way up to around Christmas time. Females can be maintained pretty reasonably, very economically. They don't need as much input. So from a forage standpoint, you can maintain them on permanent pastures. So if you live in the part of the country where you do have extended grazing into the fall, or if you're a producer that rotationally grazes your pastures and you've stockpiled some pasture, that can certainly work well. Small grain pastures can work. Crop residue, corn stalk residue can work extremely well. In fact, the first 30 days on corn stalks can get extremely fat. So you almost got to watch them a little bit so they don't get too fat too quick. And generally that crop residue, particularly corn stalk residue, will start to fade out a little bit after about 30 days and they'll just be eating the stalk. So then you just need to kind of worry about the protein intake they're getting towards the end of their time on crop residue. In our operation, it's primarily hay once they get into the dry lot breeding barns. Fetal growth is minimal, and so the requirement of this female is not very high. It's almost the same as if she was on the maintenance diet. Our optimal body condition scores that we're kind of shooting for would be anywhere from a 2, ideally 2.5 to maybe sometimes 3 at the end of this, because we want them to be increasing their body condition scores from coming in from pasture and breeding at around 2 to lambing around 3.5, maybe even 4 would be ideal. So we want them to increase their body condition score. So we need to make sure we continue to think about good quality forages, good quality supplements. And then because legume hay, in our instances, gets kind of expensive as we're purchasing it for fall sometimes, we tend to feed grass hay early on. Average or low quality hay can be fed during early gestation, and we will leave our higher quality hays, our higher legume content hays, or alfalfa mixed hays for lactation, because ewes can do extremely well on the low quality hay. So I'm going to show you some few little feeding charts that I use in my course. I downloaded them from a Penn State University kind of fact sheet, and I use this in my sheep production courses. And what they really are just kind of some samples, some examples of a combination of a forage, and later on a forage and a supplement, that what they would do is they would meet the NRC requirements of the ewe. At the end of this presentation, and hopefully you can see it later if you need to go back, I'll show you some NRC requirement tables of ewes at certain stages of their production. But this is a neat little kind of a quick guide of how you combine forages and supplements. So in this case, they got it broke down by smaller frame, maybe white-faced 130-pound ewes. Then if you're more maybe a frame sheep producer, a little bit larger sized ewe. Unfortunately, I don't have this information for goats, but certainly it's probably out there. For in this case, it's just based on sheep numbers. So you can see 3 pounds of alfalfa during this stage of an animal, or this stage of a ewe's production schedule, is enough to meet our the NRC requirements. 3.5 pounds of grass hay is enough to meet our requirements. And then as we get into late gestation, so in our situation here, because we lamb in January, February, we're getting to that last 6 weeks from Christmas all the way to mid-January. This is where we want that ewe, or even a doe in this case, to be getting high quality nutrition, to be gaining weight, to preparing for lambing or kidding. And so 70 to 80% of fetal growth occurs during that last 6 weeks. And so her demand for nutrients, not only for herself to maintain, but it's for herself to put on extra condition prior to lambing, and for these fetuses to grow. And so the ewe should gain about 10 to 30 pounds by the time she lambs. So our goal is to get those ewes from a 2 to 2.5 at breeding, and then her gestation period, 150 days, to get her up to ideally 3.5 and maybe even 4. Some textbooks even suggest 4 condition body score at lambing. So our goal for our entire flock would be to get them to a 3.5, and that's a smooth over spine, some condition along their ribs if you're handling them. And so that's our goal. It takes about 13% of live weight in gain to equate to 1 unit of body condition score. So on a 150-pound ewe, that's about 19 pounds that we have to put on that ewe for her to even move 1 condition score. And in some cases, we need to move 1 to 1.5 condition scores. And so that may turn into a situation where we might have to start split feeding. Probably the number 1 reason that you see split feeding would be a producer that ultrasounds their ewes, not only to see if they're pregnant, but most ultrasound technicians now can do fetal counts. And at the university here, we do utilize that technique, and we can get fetal counts on our ewes. And with that, we can separate the ewes carrying singles and feed them in a different management group, because their nutrient requirements won't be quite as great. And we can separate the ewes that have twins and triplets or multiple births and feed them in a separate group as well. And you'll often see those ewes that are carrying singles gain weight a little bit quicker because they don't have quite the demand on their body, and they'll kind of put on condition quite a bit faster. And those ewes that are carrying twins and triplets seem like they tend to be a little slower to get more condition, which makes sense because they have quite a bit more fetal growth inside that they're taking care of as well. Poor nutrition can result in lower birth weights. So if your ewes come into lambing, or your kids come into or your does come into kidding a little bit thin, you're going to see lower birth weights. you're going to see lower milk production, less udder development in your females, and you're going to see reduced lamb vigor. We've done some research here at the university, and I did some research at another institution where we correlated body condition score at lambing with lamb vigor, and we saw much lower lamb vigor. They were much slower to get up and suckle. And we also saw reduced colostrum quality as well, which is very important for those lambs to get high quality colostrum. So we want those ewes to come in to lambing with a good, good body condition score. And so here's, from a forage standpoint, the combination of hay is generally recommended. Cold weather, as we get into Minnesota and the upper Midwest, will increase their nutritional requirements, especially if you keep your females outside with low quality shelter. They're going to have quite a bit of increase in nutritional requirements. Generally, as those ewes get closer to lambing, they just have a struggle consuming enough forages. So it's hard to meet sometimes their nutritional requirements by forages alone, unless there's a lot of forage or an extremely high quality forage, because their fetuses are growing, their uterus is getting stretched. It's going to kind of squeeze their rumen intake, or the amount of intake capacity they have. Here's some more examples from the Penn State folks. The example rations they give, and here's where they start balancing forage with supplement. And you can see if you can get if you're in certain parts of the country and you are maybe lambing at late in the spring where you have really good pasture or good spring pasture growth, pasture could be adequate. You certainly are going to have to forage test that pasture to make sure it does meet their demands for energy and protein. But if it does, it could be highly qualified to work and meet their needs. If you're feeding a stored hay, you might have to balance it with some corn depending on intake. Sometimes you get these smaller ewes, and if they're heavy in lamb, it could be a challenge to get those ewes to consume this much. Now this is consumed, this isn't just offered, because there is going to be a waste. There's going to be some that they pick out and it falls on the ground. So this is kind of consumed to meet their needs. And sometimes they just can't ingest this much, like 4.25 pounds of alfalfa. So you might have to balance it out. A bigger ewe is going to take a little more demand. You're going to have to probably supplement just a little bit more hay and a little bit more grain supplement. At the university, we use a commercial feed, basic commercial feed that we can get made pretty economical. And so we follow more of a grass hay in a commercial feed blend, or even a mixed hay in a commercial feed blend. So these are nice kind of examples of how you can balance forages and supplements to meet their nutritional need. So as we get into lactation, this is where their demand becomes the greatest, because they have to produce milk. They need to kind of start getting their body condition back just a little bit and recover after birth. And sometimes if they're first-time lambers, such as ewe lambs, if you put them in a lamb right away, their bodies are still growing themselves. Very similar to the first calf heifer problems that a lot of cattlemen suffer too. That the first calf or first lambers are growing as well. So how much you feed will depend on the number of offspring. We sometimes use a split nursing system where we have different pens. The ewes that are raising singles will be fed differently than the ewes that are raising multiple births. Weight and body condition score, the age of the ewe, and the season of the year. Ideally, like I said, it'd be great if we could separate those ewes in the single group feeding and multiple birth feeding. If a producer cannot do that, and there's been times here with our university flock where we couldn't do that because of some housing issues, we tend to feed a little heavier to meet the needs of the multiple births, and the ewes that are raising the singles just get a little extra dessert, so to speak. They just get a little extra. So a rule of thumb a lot of sheep producers use is 1 pound of grain for every lamb that they're nursing, and we try to do that. So our ewes get about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of grain per lamb, besides the hay as their base. Good quality pasture can be certainly acceptable. Again, you need to do a forage test and then calculate to see if it is meeting the nutritional demands. So as I finish up here, just a few more slides. During lactation, those ewes that are raising the single lambs it can get by on like a little bit less. And so here's some sample rations again from Penn State. 4 pounds of mixed hay, 1 3/4 pounds of commercial feed, 2 pounds of grass hay, 3 3/4 pounds of commercial feed, 4.5 pounds of alfalfa or clover hay. This was probably, if I were to say what the university, what we do during lactation, they get the higher quality forages at that point. And we have an alfalfa, a little bit of red clover, grass hay mix that we buy from a producer. It's not straight alfalfa, it's a mixed hay. It's from the standpoint of price per pound of protein, price per TDN, it does calculate a little more economical for us. And we supplement with 1.5 pounds of a cracked corn mix that has actually vitamins and minerals mixed in it as well, even though they're on a loose mineral in the pin. But if you unfortunately don't meet the nutritional needs of these ewes during this time period, you're going to see some issues come up. You're going to have a really poor big body weight loss in the ewes to the point that they're going to lower milk production, and then you're going to see poor lamb gains. And so with that, you kind of want to make sure you meet the nutritional needs of your ewes. Our ewes are a little bit bigger with our Hampshire influenced sheep, and so we tend to follow maybe more of the kind of the example rations that you see here. Again, pasture is certainly acceptable. Some things you don't see on here, and probably Troy will talk about it later. This is kind of basic balanced rations for probably more common rations. You don't see corn silage on here, which is certainly a fine forage. You don't see some haylage or wet hay on here. We don't tend to use a lot of silage here at the University of Minnesota because we're a smaller flock, and some of the negatives of silage sometimes it's hard. You got to feed it up quick. You can run into some mold and issues like that. And so we tend not to use silage. I know a lot of larger producers can use silage as a forage extremely well. Just remember with silage, it is high moisture. And so you need to start thinking about feeding on a dry matter basis again to make sure you're matching their nutritional needs. Nursing twins. Certainly, you're probably going to just up the supplement a little bit, up the forage amount just a little bit, and so you can compare here the two charts. These are ewes that are growing out twin lambs. They're going to get a little higher amount of clover hay or a little higher amount of mixed hay with, again, the golden rule, 1 pound or 1.5 pounds per lamb. So they're going to get a higher level of commercial feed. The feed we use is generally a 16% commercial feed, or we just use cracked corn if that pencils out just as well. Depends on our hay testing. It depends on the level of energy and protein in our hay once we do our forage sample. And then that's kind of how we go forward with balancing with our supplement. And so I'll finish with a couple charts. This is kind of how the NRC tables for sheep, and you could certainly find the NRC tables for goats as well. And so this chart is broke down by ewe weight. So you got your smaller white face crossed ewes all the way up to, say, your registered frame Suffolks, frame Hampshires, frame Columbias, those large scaled breeds, which could be easily up in the 200-pound mature ewe size. And so this would be the TDN requirements and the protein requirements. TDN would be energy, protein would be protein. And so this would be the pounds of energy they need per day for maintenance during the summers when they're open and not bred or anything like that. And this would be the pounds of protein. So it's simply just a quick little calculation. You can get a forage test back. You can get your forage test and your grain tested. And with that, you can get the protein and the TDN on your grain mix. You can get the protein and TDN percentage on your forage. And by just multiplying through, you can calculate how much to feed of each and balance it out so you are matching their pounds of protein and pounds of energy demands for maintenance. And as you look down, it's their early pregnancy, their energy demands are slightly getting greater. And then by the time they get to early lactation with twins and triplets, they need close to this little ewe needs close to 3.9 pounds of energy in her diet. And so that'll make you think about what you're going to supplement your hay, or even if you got high quality hay, you do your calculations and you're still probably going to be short on energy. You might be even short on protein for those ewes that are lactating triplets. So with this chart, you can kind of design your balance of forage and supplements to come up with a daily ration that's going to meet her NRC requirements for protein and energy. The second chart and the last chart I'll show you is it's the amount of hay, or in this case they use shelled corn and soybean meal, required to meet the TDN and crude protein requirements of 175 pound ewe. So what they did here is they broke down the hay in terms of quality, so 16.5% protein in that hay, all the way down to a low quality grass mix of 10% protein in that hay. And then the daily allotment of that hay that you'd need to fulfill 175 pound ewes maintenance requirements. And as you go up, this chart just gives you kind of an example of how you'd balance corn and soybean meal to meet them. Generally, if the ration is deficient on energy, you're going to supplement an energy feedstuff such as corn. If it's deficient in protein, you're going to add a protein supplement such as soybean meal. It's more cost effective if you need energy in the diet to use a low cost energy supplement such as corn. It's very expensive to use soybean meal, and you can put that in the diet and get an energy reward from it, but it's much, much more expensive. It's much more economical to use it as a protein source. So they have this chart broken down by early lactation singles, twins, and triplets again, and using basically hay as the base. They added additional corn and soybean meal in this chart anyway to fulfill their nutrient requirements for their stage of production. So that's basically all I have. I'll be open to any questions, and then we'll turn over to Troy as he kind of gets more into the specifics of purchasing hay, storing hay, calculating hay quality. My goal was just to kind of give you a little overview of ewe nutrition. In leaving, I would say that the ability to observe body condition score and monitor body condition score will allow you to do great things. It'll allow you to make those feeding changes. It'll allow you to monitor those ewes throughout the year to make sure they're in that optimum body condition score and not getting too thin on you and not getting too fat on you, because if they're getting too fat on you, then it might be that you're overfeeding and you're wasting money on additional supplements, corn and protein supplements that you may not need if your ewes can maintain a good body condition score on forages alone. So I'd be open to entertain any questions.
Okay. Kyle, we do have a couple of questions in the chat box, and first one is kind of a comment. Have you used much baleage? And Troy was able to help us with the answer that some managers he works with, if a large enough herd or flocks, they can use it very successfully. And then also kind of a follow-up question to that. So it's the, do you use much baleage? And then also, are there, what about feeding pea and lentil screenings?
Well, yeah, so Troy answered. Troy, he was up here. He's a former student, so he knows that we're a small flock. We only maintain 45 mature ewes and put about 20 replacements in every fall. So we don't have the ability to feed any silages or wet forages fast enough to keep the quality and to reduce mold contamination. So we don't. Larger producers definitely, if they can feed it fast enough, store it adequately, keep it in proper form, they definitely can do it. As far as the second question, I'm really not familiar with that feed stuff, but it certainly could be one. You can find the NRC requirements online, and you can oftentimes find the nutritional composition of feedstuffs. There's feedstuff magazines, there's feedstuff material out there that you could probably find those feedstuffs. And with that, you can oftentimes get the crude protein content. You can get the energy value, the TDN value of that feedstuff. And with that, you can certainly do some quick math and see if it balances in as a supplement. And it can work with balancing forages. There's a lot of byproducts out there that can be utilized, and there's a lot of different feedstuffs that can be utilized once you know the energy and protein content of that feedstuff.
Dr. Roseboom, in relationship to some of the folks that utilize the baleage, generally speaking, I recommend that depending on what time of the year, if it's cold, the quality stays pretty good on the baleage, and generally you can get about a week's worth of feeding out of it without any issue, is what I generally suggest to people. Especially the small flocks, I encourage them to utilize the individually wrapped bales as compared to the line wrap bales. And the other thing that sometimes some of these screenings and such that are available to people, I encourage them to be very aware of mold and mycotoxins in relationship to them, and make sure they're in good condition before they invest in them. Otherwise, you can run into problems with some vomitoxin or alpha-toxin that can cause reproductive issues as well.
Oh, no, great answer, Troy. No question. I didn't think about that angle as well. The safety of the product, get it tested, you bet.
And then there was a question, are there any ration balancing programs available to producers? And Brenda was able to add at sheepandgoat.com/ration software is one that would be good. And Troy Salzer also added that Maryland University has a very good small ruminant program with some additional information. Kyle, are there other resources that you know of?
No, not really specifically. I don't know if I've ever seen anything online. We just kind of do ours in-house with Excel. I don't know if there's any out there that does sheep ration balancing. Maybe Travis can interject. I'm not familiar with that, and maybe there's people that are watching that actually use an online ration balancing from another university. Oh, there's someone actually said that Montana State has one. So I'm not familiar with what's out there. We just use our in-house system that I've created kind of just simply on Excel.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. And of course, you can contact your local county extension educator for resources as well. We'll have these resources available as well.